Hello, Twitch. Welcome back to another episode of Howdy Partner. I'm here with my buddy over there, Claudine, another partner solutions architect here from AWS. I'm Am Grabelny. You may have seen my face here on Twitch at some point. I don't know, doing this for a while. We're joined today by two friends from, and you're going to have to help me because you told me earlier something that sounded like flamingo, and that's all I can hear now. You're going to have to help me with the pronunciation.
Yeah, let's go with Lumigo. I think Lumigo should be good.
Lumigo, okay,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
We got Jan and Aviad. Jan, too, I got to brag a little bit, is one of our serverless heroes at AWS, too. You'll have to tell us a little bit more about that and what that means, Jan. But before we throw things over to you all, Claudine, who are you? What do you do? What you know?
Who am I? I've been trying to decide that also for years. Yeah, great intro, AM. I'm a PSA here. I do cool things like go on Twitch's Howdy Partner show and highlight partners doing cool stuff. But I've been here for a little over 3 years now, and I'm having a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
Do you want to tell us what Howdy Partner is?
What is Howdy? Well, I mean, okay, so you have to do the Howdy thing first.
The Howdy thing.
Because you're the one from Texas. So this is your job.
So you're really just like painting me into a corner, really. My whole identity is just a Texan, right? Like, that's actually pretty true of most people from Texas. Like, the first thing they tell you is, hey, I'm from Texas. Anyway, yeah, howdy. Like, what does howdy mean? For those international viewers who are not familiar with howdy, it's just a greeting. It's like a country greeting, I guess, or cowboy greeting. I don't know. I just thought I actually didn't come up with a name. I have to give credit to my wife. My wife came up with a name for the show, and I always work backwards from a name. You can't do a show without a name first, I think. And so, Howdy Partner is all about the APN partners or Amazon Partner Network partners that we work with on a day-to-day basis here at AWS. It includes two different categories of partners typically. What's called an ISV and an SI. We actually haven't had an SI on the channel yet. We've got one planned, so stay tuned. But today, Lumigo.
Do you want to explain what those terms are, AM, ISV, and SI? Yeah. I don't know if everyone knows about that.
Right. I was about to. Aviad and Jan are both from an ISV company or independent software vendor, right? And what that means is they package and build software that they sell to you versus an SI or a solutions integrator or systems integrator. I've heard both those as the initialisms or acronyms. I don't remember the difference. Anyway, those are consulting partners where you pay them, a set amount of money, and they deliver a software package to you that's custom built for you, or maybe they've built something that they've deployed out to multiple customers, but they don't actually necessarily maintain it. You may pay them extra to maintain it. They deliver a product at the end that meets a specific need that you discussed with them. Whereas something like a SaaS product or solution as a service type product is something that you subscribe to, and multiple people subscribe to it. So we feature both types of partners here on Howdy Partner. We haven't featured the SIs yet, but we're getting to it. But Jan or Aviad, who wants to take it? Who wants to talk about what you all do?
I'll start. So, well, in Lumigo, we're big into serverless. This is our domain that we like and love, and what Lumigo does is give you monitoring and troubleshooting abilities for your serverless, application. And what we do is we connect to your environment, and then you can very easily understand what's going on. Now, in general, serverless is awesome, and we use it. Our backend is completely serverless, and I love it. I've been in software too many years, and since we started Lumigo and we decided to go the serverless way, one of the things which is so amazing is just how productivity can jump. I've never been in a team, and our team is great. It's not only serverless, but serverless is one of the things that allows us to build things just so much quicker. And it's so great to see how serverless is going out and catching more and more people, and you see more companies, startups, big companies using it in different projects. And as they use serverless more and more, you start seeing how there are some things which are a little bit hard in serverless, and that's why we want to help.
Yeah, monitoring, logging, all those types of things that most people have gotten comfortable with in some sort of framework or like deployable application to a different environment than Lambda, for example. There's been a lot of tooling built for that across decades. I think it's one of the first questions I get from people when they first switch over to serverless is like, oh no, how do I actually do logging now? How do I do monitoring? How do we do all the things that I've been doing, inside of this, either a VM or a container or like just these other more familiar environments. So it's great to hear that you all have some solutions to talk through today. I know we're going to talk through a lot of different offerings from AWS too around the serverless atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, the ecosystem. I don't know. We've got the serverless application repository that I think you all might be talking a bit about today. Lambda layers, which is another really interesting topic that we'll cover today. Before we get into anything else, I have to ask, Jan, serverless hero, what does that mean? Like, it's pretty cool. It's a cool title to have, I would say. But can you tell us more about the Heroes program and what it means to be a serverless hero?
Yeah, I guess the well, I don't know about what it means to be a hero. I guess I'm kind of lucky that I got picked, but certainly has. It's been great. You can see, well, certainly I get a lot of, I guess, insight into what's happening within the AWS roadmap. We get every quarter we get some meetings with AWS teams to hear about what's coming up, some of the things that they're working on, and also we get involved with a lot of the beta testing for new features, like the new EFS thing that just came out. So I had a chance to play around with that pretty early on, as well as quite a few other features that you guys may know about. Things like provision concurrency, had a lot of fun playing around with that last year before the big announcement, the reInvent, and things like that. So you get, I guess, as part of the Heroes program, you get access to a lot more people within AWS, and you get access to all these program managers for different streams of work that's happening within AWS, and also you get involved with things like this all the time, which is great. Very nice way for me to meet different people, both from the community but also from AWS as well. In terms of how it works, I guess a lot of people have asked me how to become a hero. I guess you just have to do work for the community, and for me personally, I do a lot of content. I'm a very big believer of just learning in public. So you probably see a lot of blog posts from me over the years. I think I probably hit 200 mark at this point, just on the articles for on the Lambda and serverless the last couple of years, and do a lot of talks and things like that, which I find again is a great way to go meet people. Maybe less so now. I think we're still finding the sweet spot for the virtual events on how to do that corridor track, which quite hard to do when you're not in person. But I did used to really enjoy going to meetups and conferences and just chat to people and find out what they're doing. I guess, but yeah, for me, the Heroes program has been really great in terms of getting some recognition, but also opened a lot of doors for me as a consultant. I do a lot of work with Lumigo, but also double as an independent consultant with a lot of customers. So having some kind of a AWS Heroes thing, I guess, probably gives me some credits that I may not deserve, but I'll take it anyway.
You probably have more access to AWS people than I do, and I work here. So that tells you how important it is to have our heroes and how much work you all do for the community too. I mean, that's you hit the nail on the head from my experience with working with other heroes. Like you all are very influential in the community. You give a lot back. You do a lot of work that really benefits the greater AWS community at large too. And you also, highlight a lot.
I just want to say that, like, I think it was 2017 when I started thinking about serverless, and serverless was okay. That's a cool thing. Maybe I'll look into it. I mean, Jan was I was the burning monk. This was the blog, which this is what taught me serverless, like the open source, the courses. So basically, I think Jan was a hero even before he was selected to be a hero. So it's very clear. And when we started working together, it was, wow, I can't believe that I'm actually working with Jan, the same guy who got me into serverless. So yeah, I think it's very clear why Jan is a hero.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I also want to thank you guys for joining us today, because I know that it's kind of late where you both are, right? And AM and I are just kind of, operating on normal people hours here on our side. But I don't want to assume that all of our viewers know what serverless means. So maybe, I don't know, AM, maybe you can talk about what is serverless. Does that mean that compute is just running in a vacuum, or we have code running nowhere?
Code running nowhere. That's the dream, isn't it? That's the. I actually tried to make dev null as a service with Nikki once on a previous show, where it just you send your code to us and it just goes to dev null. We just delete it. It's the most secure way. But yeah, serverless. I guess 2014, 2015-ish was what kicked things off around that time frame with Lambda. Lambda's the one thing that everybody immediately recognizes if they've seen the service as the serverless thing. There's a lot more, right? A lot of services, AWS services, a lot of services outside of AWS. Third-party services qualify as serverless. I think understanding it foundationally is you have to know about Lambda. It's where these blocks of code that you write operate. Essentially, you don't have to scale out things. You don't have to figure out how things are going to run. You just have to package up a block of code that adheres to an event pattern, depending on what event trigger that you're going to use. So on one side of your function, a Lambda function that is going to fire, you've got an event that actually fires it. Could be it feels like hundreds of different things at this point. And it can even now be interesting things from outside AWS too. With for my friend Mo, I have to name drop Event Bridge once per stream. So you can actually now take things from outside sources from your AWS account to like Slack or Auth0 and other partners to trigger your function and your block of code, whatever you've written in there, to run. And then essentially whatever you can reach from your code, either in a VPC, on the public internet, through an API or something, you've got that to call out to and finish your function logic. That's the most basic serverless thing you can do. Then you can get into things like step functions that are orchestrated patterns of Lambda functions and other pieces of serverless architecture. S3 is a huge piece, I would argue, of doing any kind of serverless work. That's what you'd think is your storage layer for serverless. If I was thinking in terms of a Linux system, the file system, right? So S3 is not a file system, obviously, but if I need to just go store some bytes somewhere serverlessly, I'm going to probably turn to S3. And now recently I can connect up to an EFS cluster too. So I could actually get a file system serverlessly. Dynamo is another kind of key serverless piece of any architecture. So you can, persist data in a database It's a very different kind of database. If you're used to more of a relational database pattern, it will take some getting used to, but it scales effortlessly and without you having to turn knobs or scale stuff up. Yeah, I mean, go on and on and on. Then you get into like the tooling, right? And I think we're probably going to talk a lot about tooling today, if I had to guess, right, Aviad and Jan? You've got things like how do I deploy a serverless app? And you've got options like serverless framework or Stackery or AWS SAM. How do I, monitor or do application level stuff once my application is deployed? Lumigo. And you've got things too, like just beyond the I just have a block of code to run. Things start to get really, really more complex, right? Than just hey, I've got a block of code, I need to run it somewhere. And we might talk about things like I mentioned earlier, the serverless application repository and Lambda layers. Claudine, do you want to talk quickly about those two things?
Wait, which things?
Serverless app repo and Lambda
I can talk about SAR. Yeah.
Like at a high level, you don't have to go like crazy in depth or anything.
Yeah. So SAR, serverless application repository, simply as its name suggests, it's a repo for serverless applications. So it allows you to store and share applications so that others can use them to build and deploy serverless applications. So maybe you have a very common use case that you want to build a serverless application for. SAR helps you avoid having to reinvent the wheel. So if you built your application using AWS best practices, which we certainly hope you would, SAR would help you ensure that your application is getting reused and deployed using those same AWS best practices. So very important if you're one of those organizations who want to make sure that all teams are doing the right thing architecturally, SAR would definitely help you with that. Each application is templatized using AWS Serverless Application Model, SAM, which tells AWS basically which resources the application needs to be provisioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Totally.
And there's no additional cost to use SAR. You only pay for the resources that you spin up and use.
Right. Yeah, and later soon when we'll see the actual Lumigo platform, but we'll also show you a lot of open source, and some of that is exactly through SAR, just because it makes it so much easier to deploy it and have it like in a few clicks.
Yeah, and one other thing too that you might hear Aviad and Jan talk about that I'll just give you a heads up about if you've never heard of it, so that they don't have to explain it, is Lambda layers. And a Lambda layers, it's kind of a recent thing, I'd say, like in the last year. I think it came out reInvent of last year. It's a way to package up typically what is used to package up libraries that are going to be used across functions. So if you have a library that is going to be shared across multiple functions, instead of including it singularly with each function, you actually just package it up into a layer and then install that layer into each function that needs that library. So you don't actually have to do it at the application code and zip file layer, right? You can actually just, and then when you have to go update that layer, for example, you could just update that layer instead of having to go update hundreds of functions, right? Individually.
That's not quite true.
Well, yeah.
You still have to update the functions to reference to make them reference new version.
New layer, but you don't actually have to repackage the entire function code, is what I mean.
That's right, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, that. Thank you for keeping me clear on that, Jan. Yeah.
That's why he's a hero.
That's right. You don't actually have to go update the function code itself, but you will have to go reference the new version of the layer that you do update. Yes.
And incidentally, that's one of the things that we're going to show later. Is we've got this tool that basically helps you manage the update of the version of layers to for all the functions that references it.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's great. It's really great. So if you are tuning in for the first time, this is AWS Howdy Partner, where we interview and let our AWS APN partners come in and show a hands-on demo of their products and their solutions. We're about to jump into a demo with Aviad and Jan to learn all about how they can help you with serverless monitoring and general maintenance of your serverless applications. If you have questions while you're watching, that's what we're here for. Please put them in chat, right? That's why we are broadcasting to you all on Twitch, is so that you can get your questions directly to the experts that can get those answers for you. So please.
Well, I have a question. Am I allowed to ask questions?
Absolutely. Yeah. Jan and Aviad, we might be interrupting you while you're talking.
Well, they haven't started yet, so maybe this is a good time for me to ask. But obviously, serverless has many benefits, right? So you're not having to spin up and manage your own EC2 instances. You're not having to pay for resources that aren't really running. But tell us about, the hard parts of using serverless. Like, what are the cons here? You mentioned that it's harder to monitor, and that's, obviously something where you guys come in. But talk about the challenges of using serverless.
Right. So I think that one of the cons is is same as the Pro, which is it's highly distributed, right? So it makes it very easy if you want to add one piece of code or add one table in DynamoDB. Which is amazing, and you can make changes there without affecting the whole system immediately. But also, when you have a distributed system, it means that it gets harder and harder to understand how everything is connected, how everything is related. And if you make a change in one Lambda, for example, you want to make sure that you know who else is related to that Lambda. And sometimes when you have an issue in the Lambda, it's not necessarily a problem in the code that belongs to that specific Lambda. For example, if you have a crash in the code and you check what happened, and you see a second before the crash started happening, somebody delivered code which divides by 0, then hey, that's easy. I mean, it's bad, but it's easy. Same thing everywhere you code, Linux kernel, servers, no servers, same thing. But sometimes the Lambda just starts to crash, and you check the Lambda and nothing changed in the last month. And then it might be something else, upstream. So the data that is arriving to the Lambda has changed, maybe something else. And you need to be able to go up that stream and understand what happened. And making all those correlations can be hard. So that's one of the cons, which goes together with the pros. Jan, do you want to give one? One of the cons?
There's no cons.
That's a hero. You see, this is a hero.
Yeah, he's really keeping his hero status. Yeah.
But honestly, I think probably the biggest challenge I've seen, or at least the biggest the difficulty that my clients have run into has mostly been not so much the technology itself, but it's just changing their mindset and changing the way they used to do things. I mean, personally, for me, once everyone goes through that process of, okay, this is how we've always done things. This is how we always monitor things. And now with Lambda, even though you get a lot of these things, a lot of this monitoring stuff out of the box, but you need to know how to do that. You need to know how to use the coverage metrics. You need to know how to use how to record custom metrics and things like that. You need to know the trade-off now you have to deal with. I think that's where people struggle with. And also another big one, I think, is there's a lot of companies I'm working with now who are basically stepping into cloud and microservices and serverless in one go. So that's a lot of paradigm shift all at once. I think that's probably the biggest thing with Lambda and serverless is that that's kind of just the idiomatic way to do things. You can't really build a monolith like you used to. So a lot of the lift and shift, it just doesn't work, or it's super suboptimal in terms of the end result and performance you're going to get if you try to do it. I think that's probably the biggest downside. Is just it requires a re-architecture to get all the benefits you're going to get with serverless. Otherwise, if you just want to take your existing Express app with I don't know, God knows how many endpoints and shove it into a Lambda function, it's probably going to work, but it's going to have really bad performance, and then you're going to realize, what's going on? Why is this? Why am I seeing like 5-second cold start time? Cold starts are so bad, it's terrible. So to get the most benefit out of Lambda, you do have to re-architect, you do have to rethink how you build systems. And if you can do that, then it's great. But for a lot of the large, I guess, existing projects that are migrating, is not an easy job. It does take quite a bit of thinking to use serverless components for databases, for storage, for with S3, DynamoDB, rather than using what you're used to already. I think that's probably the biggest challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, you described the just take a web app framework and drop it into Lambda. I've heard that called two different things. I want to know what you vote for. Either mono Lambda or a Lambda lift is what I've heard.
Yeah, so they actually have slightly different meaning. One of them is, I forgot which one's which. One of them is basically if you run like an Express app within a Lambda function. I can't remember if that's a Lambda lift or is that a mono Lambda. But the other one is, you have one Lambda function that does its own routing, but not necessarily using Express, which means that you don't have some of the overhead in terms of the having to co-start the Express framework and all of that, but you still have just one Lambda function that does everything. So there's two different things. I can't remember which one's which.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a distinction. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. I think that continuing what Jan said, I think that a lot of times when people ask what is serverless, and it's like serverless is technology, but it's also like an architecture, and it's like a way of thinking. It's not exactly, you can't do that lift and shift. Really, if you really want to go serverless, not just use the Lambdas. And I think that's why a lot of times you see serverless being used in new projects and not as much in like existing projects, legacy projects, which you want to break down immediately to a lot of small pieces. Usually you see it in the new projects.
Makes sense. And then I've heard another popular phrase to throw around when you do have an existing project called the strangle pattern, right? Or strangler pattern. Do one of you want to talk about that? I know that's kind of a big, it's more of a microservices thing too, but I hear it thrown around a lot by a lot of serverless experts.
Yeah, so it's basically where you take a big monolith rather than leaving the moving or reacting the whole thing in one go. You take one small piece of it. For example, when I was working for a company, I forgot where. It was a social network. That's about 2016. So we had a big monolith. So we're moving to serverless. Couldn't do one big bang release. So what we did was when a requirement came up that we wanted to improve the search feature, so we just rewrote the search bit, and then we just did some proxying so that the client would talk to the old monolith API, and that would just proxy the request to this new endpoint we've got. Once we know it's working, then we updated the client to talk to our new API, and then gradually you do that for, I guess, the verticals within your application. Maybe search is one, maybe, I don't know, all the processing is another one, and then gradually you find that all of your monolith just been moved to different services or different functions within your serverless application.
Claudine, you actually were telling a story earlier about how you ran across one of Jan's blog posts. You wanna ask me about that?
I mean, do you want me to be completely transparent about my experience, or?
No, totally not. You should no.
I
you
should
never be
just pretend that I wasn't Googling answers to an internal quiz that we were asked to take, and There was a question about the saga pattern, and I was like, ooh, okay, let me Google this so that I could arrive at the right answer. And the first result that came up was Jan's blog about the saga pattern. And I think I got that question correctly because of your blog. But yeah, I did run into the burning monk. So thank you so much for that, serverless hero.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate your help. There's a comment in the chat about configuring cloud. Mike132 said that configuring the CloudWatch metrics and alerts is where he gets lost with serverless.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think there are a lot of metrics, and deciding exactly which ones you want to follow and where's the level where you actually want to get an alert about. It's not easy. It's totally doable. There are some even plugins that can help you do that. But this is one of the places where in Lumigo we just make it easier by giving you those alerts out of the box, both by allowing you to click. I want tell me everything that looks weird. I want to know about it. But also picking those specific alerts that you want, and we can automatically give them to you.
Cool. So we've got a question in chat too about a hybrid Lambda step function EC2 ECS observability solution, and what would that look like? That is it's like you throw in batch and maybe you've got all the different computers.
Right.
I don't know if that's maybe something we want to answer by showing some of the product, and we can answer that gradually, or do you all want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer it, and today in the product we'll see we'll see the lambdas specifically. This is what we have right now, but in your own environment, Lumigo can give you observability both for Lambda and to step functions. And now we're also adding EC2 and ECS. We already have customers who are using that. We're usually focusing on customers who have serverless. So some of them are, totally serverless, but a lot of times it is hybrid. It's a combination. And so we started out with serverless, and as we saw those hybrid environments, we started adding the ability to show the transactions end-to-end, including those EC2s, ECS, or wherever your code is running, so you can see the connection.
Cool. Aviad, I know you've got stuff to show us. Jan, I know you've got stuff to show us. You wanna kick it off and get into the demo?
Yeah, Aviad? Sure. Yeah. So I'll start. I'll also tell you that Jan has a lot of very cool open source tools that are for the community, are being used by everyone. But he's also going to show you something which is a work in progress. It's not out yet, but it's something that we think can be very useful, and he's going to show you like an early version of that. So that's going to be cool. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you how the Lumigo platform looks like.
Sounds great.
1 second.
All right.
Okay, cool. So, yeah. So just before I dive in and show you all the things, I want to say that the first part is always, of course, the integration with the AWS environment. So when you want to integrate Lumigo into your environment, we worked very, very hard to make it very, very easy. So you just connect it with an IAM role, and then we can automatically, using some of the things you mentioned before, like Lambda layers, add the monitoring capabilities to your Lambdas and the tracing, and then you get all of this. So I'll start, in the beginning. This is, the dashboard. It shows you the most basic stuff, which a lot of times are the most important stuff, showing you how many invocations you have, how many failures you have, those top 5 functions, that you always want to know which functions are having the most trouble. So you can easily see that. We can drill down into everything, but first I want to scroll down and start seeing things which are a little bit deeper. So now I can also see which functions have the most cold starts. So if I want to start working on cold starts, I don't need to, start guessing. I can very easily see which ones have the most percentage or the total number. And here I can even see the different services which I'm using. So it doesn't matter if it's actually AWS or a third-party service. I can see all of them. And here I can see how many calls are being made to these services. Also, what's the latency, the P99, P95. And I know if I want to start, improving something in my system, I can very easily see where the slowest parts are. Now, this takes us back to what we said about a distributed system. You have a lot of parts. So, for example, Stripe. Maybe you have like 10 different lambdas calling Stripe. Because if you have only one, it can be easy. But if you have 10 different lambdas calling different APIs for Stripe, or of course a lot of lambdas calling SNS, that's when it gets hard. And you want to correlate all of that together and being able to see in one place exactly what's happening. So into this, I'll be able to drill down. I'll do that in a second. I want to take you to a place where you can see what's happening with your system. So let's see the visual part first. In the system app, the system app, I can very easily see the architecture of my system. So I can see immediately who's connected to who. I can understand if I'm going to make a change, for example, in this lambda, the airline distribute payment lambda. It's going to maybe affect calls to payments table in DynamoDB. It's being called by this SNS. And because your system, again, it goes back to the fact that it can be very distributed, we're always thinking how not to overload you. So we automatically cluster similar lambdas, for example, according to their stacks. And you can always drill down and see more information. You can always open up and see whatever is interesting for you. One thing about the system apps is, so why do I need to know how my own architecture looks like? So basically, I built it. I have maybe an architect, and he supposedly knows exactly what's going on. And when we were thinking about, is this important? Do we need to do this? As we were sitting down with users, more than once when we asked them, like, no, just tell us how your serverless environment looks like so we can think of the best solution. A lot of times we'd get more than one answer. Like around the table, different people would explain like how the system looks like. And just because serverless is so easy to change, it means that a lot of times there are changes several times a day, and lambdas go in, lambdas go out, new services are being introduced into your system, different teams are working, and here you have one single source of truth showing you exactly what's going on. You don't have to draw on the whiteboard and hoping that everything will get in. So this is the system app making sense of your highly distributed system. Now, after you understand what's going on, usually you want to know, is everything okay? So you can go to the issues page, and here basically, I'll let it load in. You can see.
Sorry, before you move away from the system map, we had a question. I told you we'd be interrupting. I apologize. But
sure.
So the question is, when DynamoDB streams are used to trigger a Lambda, right? Can you see this in the system map? Would this come across?
Yeah. Totally. So DynamoDB streams. So if you have, for example, Lambda putting something into the DynamoDB and that triggers another Lambda, you'll be able to see that connection end to end. In general, I can say DynamoDB is a major part of the serverless world, and a lot of times people forget that serverless is much more than Lambda. So Lambda is like the queen of the serverless world. It's the glue that puts everything together. But seeing all the different services are very important, and we put a lot of effort into that. So yeah, definitely Streams is something that we see being used by a lot of our users. And by the way, I'll mention that we use it as well. And since we eat our own dog food, morning, evening, night, all the time, we use Lumigo. And the team is like one of the main drivers for the features that we develop. That's one of the reasons we added the Streams ability.
And we're getting a shout out in the chat too. Sarah Tool said they love the managed system map functionality. And just to clarify, Mike132 was asking if the system map view is actually based on live data.
Yes. So the system map is totally live, and I think that's one of the main points about it. So at every single moment, you can see exactly how your system looks like. You don't have to wait. You don't have to ask around. And you can play around with a time span. So if you want to look back, at history and understand how it changed, how it looked a month ago, and then how it looks today, you can do that as well.
Aviad, can you show them how to say click on one of the data, I guess maybe table or something, and then find all the things that uses it? I think that's really useful. I've had cases where the same table get used by quite a few different things, and if I want to just quickly identify all the different functions that I need to look at that touch this table, I can just expand.
Exactly. So this allows you to very easily go back and add and see exactly who's using it. This example is even a little bit, it's a simple environment, but as Jan said, this is why we added this. Once clicking on a specific resource, I can go back and see exactly who's using it, and it saves you, those few seconds where it means that you'll actually check it and not just guess it.
Does anybody want to quickly just give a definition of DynamoDB streams and how that fits into serverless architecture, where I might use that for anyone who has never used DynamoDB streams before? John or Aviad?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so for example, I use DynamoDB streams a lot for things like if I wanted to create a backup of my data, like probably a history table. So I've got my main table for my transaction workload, and then I've got my history table for maybe some auditing and things like that. I would use a stream so that whenever data gets written or updated in the DynamoDB stream as a table, I'll use a stream to trigger a Lambda function to then forward the data somewhere else. Could be into a history table in DynamoDB, or maybe forward it to turn it into a domain event and put it into and publish into EventBridge, for example, as example.
Yeah.
I'll say too, just shout out quickly to one of our other AWS heroes, Alex Debris. I just talked with him on a different Twitch show. As you may or may not know, if you're familiar with Alex, he's kind of a DynamoDB, I don't know what to call it, like a magician. I mean, he does things with Dynamo that are incredible. And he just put out a book pretty recently called the DynamoDB book. So if you are looking to get deeper into DynamoDB, it's a really great place to start. And I think it's always great to support AWS Hero. So go check that out. I'll put the link in chat. Go ahead, Aviad. Sorry.
No, I want to say, if you're doing anything with DynamoDB, go read that book. It's a great book. So I'm going back to issues. So basically, a lot of times when you have a system, so it's nice to know how it looks like. It's nice to know what's connected to what. But you want to know, is something going wrong? Is there any issues? So, because something always will go wrong, right? So here you can very easily see what issues you have, all the things that might be not working in your system. So it can be straightforward things like exceptions. So that's always interesting. But there's can be other things. So maybe something might go wrong soon because your Lambda, the last time that it was running, got very close to its timeout or got very close to its memory limit. If I look at the average, maybe it's going up and getting very, very close to the limit. So you can see that as an issue here as well, and you can fix it before something actually goes wrong. And then we can take it even to the next level. So not only specific exceptions, but if you have, a lot of times if you have a big system, you don't want to know about each and every issue. You do want to know if there's a high percentage of issues. So if over 20% of the invocations right now are failing, show me that as an issue and even as an insight. So I don't know exactly what's the percentage that is okay with me, but if there's a spike in the failures, tell me about that spike. So we can do that as well. We show you that there's a spike up. Sometimes, by the way, it's going down. So sometimes if there's a drop in invocations, that means something might be wrong. So for all of these, you can see an issue, and for each of the issue, you can get an alert to whatever system you're using to get your alerts. So from here, I can very easily continue my drill down. So I can quickly see the exception. I'm going to take an exception as an example. But once I click on it, I go to the function page, which had this issue, this exception. And now everything is filtered according to this exception. So I can see all the different invocations that had this exception. I can see when they happen, are they cold starts? As you can see, for example, here, they're all cold starts. I can also take a look at the dashboard and see some more information, not only invocations and failures, also memory duration, cold starts, also cost. That's one of the things that's interesting about Lambda. Again, one of the good parts, but has its dangers. We were talking about the pros and cons of going serverless. So one of the big pros of Lambda that you pay only for what you use. You never pay for the idle, and that's great. But you also want to see exactly where your money is going. So if you have a Lambda that is suddenly being called instead of once, like 1,000 times in concurrency, that can jump very quickly in how much you're paying. So here you can see exactly what each Lambda is costing you over time. Now, I'm going to go back to that exception that we had. And now getting to the interesting part. So when I'm going to, let's see. Now you can see it's live, right? I have to go back. This is a demo environment, and let's see. I hope nobody's updating the demo environment as we speak, which might be happening, just because we usually do it in the middle of the night, and right now it's the middle of the night. Yeah. Okay, so I'll go to something else and then get back to that. Here, we see a lot of interesting stuff, but a lot of times people just want to get back to the basic building blocks. Just, show me all the Lambdas that I have in one place so I can see them. And then I can see not only which ones have most invocations and errors, of course, but also which one takes the most time, when were they last modified. So if I have a date that something suspicious happened there, I can check that as well. And from here, I can again go into each Lambda and go into a transaction. Yep, it's a live demo. Somebody is updating my system in the background. So let's take a quick break. I think we'll move to Jan's demo, and then we'll go back to this one.
Got it. Sounds
Yeah.
good. That's
That's total proof that it's live.
It's true. You never know what will happen on Twitch.
Yep.
Cool. You were getting some shout outs for that cost graph too. People were thinking that was pretty cool, including me. I hadn't seen that before. I think that's really neat.
Yeah, and I have to say that from the beginning, people were saying that it's interesting to see how much you're spending on each Lambda and getting wanting to see spikes. But as we move forward in time, and I think as serverless becomes more mature and there are bigger and bigger projects using it, so people are spending more money on serverless, and that's when they want to know exactly when can I bring down my costs, how I can do that on one end. Also, I want to be alerted, and so I can go to sleep and make sure that not in the middle of the night somebody is there's some kind, for example, a DOS attack. So a DOS attack in Lambda is not an issue because it's fully scalable, but it does mean that you might be paying some more money than you plan to, and you can get an alert. You're paying much more than you intended to, and you can take care of that as well.
Okay, so maybe I can share my screen and show a transaction what it looks like, because I've actually got some data here as well. One sec.
Okay,
right. Can you guys
swap over?
Yeah.
There we go.
So this is what a transaction might look like in the Lumigo. This is one of the client projects I've been working on in the dev environment where, as you said, we are using DynamDB stream so that you can see the nice thing with the transaction view is that in here you can see you've got multiple functions. You see all the logs side by side, and also you can click on the function to see the events that this function was triggered with, including all the all the DynamDB object event or data, and also when you're talking to other services, you can also get the information as well in terms of the header, the request body, so that if you, so the thing about, so the definition for observability in the control theory is how well you can infer the internal state of a system by only looking at its external output. And one of the things I found is that with all these different sort of things we talk about when we talk about observability in terms of logs, in terms of traces, in terms of metrics and all of that, which is so great. But when it comes to debugging an issue with some application code, the one thing I often miss is just, okay, I know, for example, when I make a request to DynamDB, something went wrong. But I can't figure out what the problem actually is because I'm not tracking the request I'm sending to DynamDB. I can guess at what it may be based on the error that comes back. But the great thing I find with Lumigo and the fact that I often don't have to do any sort of manual instrumentation to my code is that I don't have to do any of that instrumentation myself, but at the same time, I can just go to the console and see, okay, this request failed because I'm sending something to DynamDB that is clearly not going to work because we can see the request body in there. That's one of the things that has been really, really helpful for me when it comes to sort of debugging issues with Lumigo. And again, this is a view that I think Javier was trying to show you guys. Let me see if I got something more interesting on here, on this account, maybe this one. Yeah, so this function, for example, made a request to DynamDB, wrote some data, and then that triggers another Lambda function. So the question someone had earlier about the DynamDB streams, so you can actually see this in the transaction as well, whereby I wrote something from this function to DynamDB table. This table had a streams enabled, so it triggered another Lambda function, which then wrote to another DynamDB table. And here you can see this overlap, which means when you click on this guy, there's actually multiple operations that you can step through and see what each of those operations took. How long it took, and duration, status code, when it happened, and so on. Not immutable. That's interesting. And also you can see from this original function, what was the thing that it wrote to the table, and then what my function was triggered with. And also I have the environment variable for this function that's frozen in time. Actually, that's a really interesting problem I ran into recently, whereby we had some environment variables being populated from SSM parameter store, and someone changed the SSM parameter store value when we did a deployment. So the function got deployed and it was wrong. And in this case, it had it was throwing error and couldn't figure out what the problem was until I went back to Lumigo and looked at the two invocations, the one that succeeded before the deployment and one that failed afterwards, and compared the environment variables and noticed that, oh, something was different. And then they figured out, okay, the problem was the parameter value in the SSM parameter store was changed before I did the deployment.
Yeah, we have a question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
We have a question in the chat real quick. In order for us to see these details, do we actually have to add something in the code, or do we get it automatically?
So there's multiple ways you can do that. I guess Avia, you can probably talk about talk about them in a minute. So you can. There's one of the things that we've got is the server framework plugin for Lumigo. That if you're using the server framework, then great. You can use this plugin, install it, and then just add it to your servers or YAML like this, and then you configure your token for Lumigo, which you get when you sort of sign up to the platform, and that's it. It will auto instrument your functions as part of this deployment, so it will just always do it for you. Or you can do that from the Lumigo console as well. If I go to functions, and I can enable auto tracing. So if I got functions that haven't, oops, go back. So if I got a bunch of functions I want to add tracing to them, I can just do this as well. I can add the auto tracing through the console. Mm-hmm. So Avia, do you want to sort of add more to how to do that?
Yeah. So the auto tracing, as you can see, is as easy as checking a checkbox and clicking on a drop down. And this way we can connect directly to the Lambda, and using the Lambda layer, just adding a Lambda layer and adding some environment variables. This will allow the tracer to run as part of the Lambda without the user having to change anything in his code or redeploy it himself. And I think that's a very important part, because there's different ways of tracing. There's some open source that do some of this stuff, but putting aside all the visual and how nice that you can get it in Lumigo, I think the automation is very, very important, because as you scale, as you have more and more Lambdas, you don't want to spend time inside your code and adding your instrumentation to your HTTP calls and then instrumentation to your AWS SDK. You want to add either by clicking or the plugin, as Jan showed. And if you really want, you can do it manually. And when I say manually, it means to adding 2 lines of code in the beginning of your Lambda. And that's as manual as it gets. And then all the other things happen automatically. And this allows, for Lumigo to do the heavy lifting and allows you to write the code that you know to write best. And I think it's very important. It's like part of the whole serverless way of thinking, right? I write the code that I want to write, and let everybody else, or let other people take care of the things around it. Let AWS take care of the scaling. Let, for example, Stackery or AWS Framework to take care of the deployment, and for the monitoring as well. I don't want to write code for monitoring. You don't want to spend time on that. Let us take care of that for you.
We had a follow-up too in chat from the same person, having fun. What about those who use SAM instead of serverless framework? How would you deploy?
Yeah. So that's SAM doesn't have plugins.
Right.
Maybe it will one day, but it doesn't yet. So we couldn't add plugins for that. But we see actually more and more people using SAM, which is it's a great tool as well. So what we did is allow you to just tag the functions that you want us to auto trace for you. So you just add an AWS tag that it signals us that Lambda should be traced, and then we do that auto tracing behind the scenes. So yes, you can use SAM. All you have to do is add an AWS tag, which is exactly one line of configuration, and you get auto tracing for free.
Very cool. Very cool.
There's also this view is also very nice as well. Essentially, this allows you to query pretty much any information that we collect, so that I don't have a lot of interesting things I can query here. But maybe Aviad, maybe you can show them in your environment later. So essentially, you can also just find me all the functions that has got a latency greater than a certain amount, or you can show me, and then from here you can then click into the transaction to actually see the transaction view as well. So you can you can go from that screen to say, show me, find things that are interesting, and then go into the transaction to dig deeper into what's actually happened in that particular transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also, I can just almost use it like Elasticsearch. So I kind of use it for searching like random strings as well. So for example, if I know the transaction ID, I can just lump it in here. I can search for it. So if I know the correlation ID or things like that, that allows me to identify functions, invocations, and for things I care about, I can find it here, and then I can then step into the transaction to see what actually happened on that particular transaction. Or maybe I can find only things, finding things that fail with a particular status code and things like that.
Right. So I think this is a very powerful tool, and as we develop and work on the Lumigo platform, on one hand we want to make it as easy as possible, so you can just open up and see all the, for example, the issues that you have. But then also, if you're more of a power user and you want to start digging into the details and find all the bits of data you can do that as well. And we open up all the data that we could collect, and both goes to show you, things across the system. Show me all the lambdas, that are taking too long, or having a specific type of crash. I can see that. And also, as Jan said, if I have a customer ID, I can just put that in, because a lot of times there's no crash. And then you'll just get a phone call from a customer and he's saying, I don't know, something is too slow, or I'm getting a fuzzy answer, something strange is going on, but you don't see any error. So you can just put that customer ID into the search. You'll get all the different lambdas that ran together with it, all the different services that got requests from that customer, and then you'll be able to see exactly what happened over time with that customer.
It's funny, someone just said in the chat that they just signed up their account, got the dashboard, and saw thousands of errors they're not aware of. So there you go, observability.
Yeah, that's the danger of observability. You get to know all the errors that you have.
So there's another question here about with the automatic tracing, do I need to change any code in my Lambda function or deploy? And also, do I need to deploy any Lumigo services in your account? So you don't need to deploy any Lumigo services, but we do deploy a Lumigo stack that essentially just provisions an IAM role that allows us to pull information from your account. So for example, when we look at the transaction for this, look at information for this transaction, these logs are fetched from CloudWatch logs on demand. So we're going to need some permission to fetch information from CloudWatch logs and things like that, so that we can show you everything in one go, including estimated cost for this transaction, and how long it took. And if you've got multiple functions, all the logs are going to stack together chronologically. And in terms of the code change, you don't have to make any code change if you use the Server Framework plugin. However, if you're not using server framework, then you do have to either use the console. Again, no code change there. And I think, Javier, you mentioned that we also auto trace, so that enable auto trace, so that if you deploy a function afterwards, we will apply the sort of tracing on a function again. Right.
We cover deployment after deployment, and we make sure that all the traced lambdas stay traced. Right. And with SAM, I guess we could. I mean, if there's enough demand for it, we're happy to investigate and to see how we can better support people that are using SAM to see how we can auto trace without you having to require the npm package and remember to put it into your code. Basically, it's 2 lines of code to require the npm package and then to use it to wrap your function. So it's not a lot of code change, but I do understand that if you've got lots of function, you don't want to be doing it by hand. So if there's a demand for it, we can look into what we can do for SAM, potentially using macros or something like that, which can then just automatically rewrite your functions for you and add tracing for it. But with the server framework, just a lot easier because it's a plugin ecosystem. As we mentioned, like with SAM, if you enable auto tracing, you can do it with a tag. But if you don't want to do auto tracing and you want to do it inside your code, SAM requires some more work. So Javier, do you want to show anything else on here, or maybe you can come back to it later? Because there's a couple other things I want to go through in terms of the open source stuff we've got as well. No, I think that we covered it. I just want to say one more thing is, like in that transaction view that we just saw, different transaction examples, we always see the logs here, all the log entries. And it's a small thing, but it's very important because sometimes you have transactions that have like maybe 10 lambdas in one transaction, and those lambdas run a number of times. So we have users who have in one transaction like 1,000 invocations of different lambdas. And then you actually need to see all those logs together. So it's not just log aggregation, which, there's great tools for log aggregations, but when you're using serverless, what you want to have is that correlation. So very easily to see all the different logs that are directly related one to another, and not having to somehow try to understand, okay, this log is correlated to this log. And for example, you have retries, so putting all the retries together, you have it all in one place, and that correlation, which is based on the distributed tracing, makes your life much, much easier. Yeah, so this is something that I've had to implement myself quite a lot of times, basically getting correlation IDs flowing through different functions, through different event sources, so that when you got a Lambda function that publish a message to, say, SQS, get picked up by another Lambda function, you want to see the logs for everything together. But even when you do have those correlation IDs that allow you to link different logs for different invocations together, you still have to have some other place you've got to go to. So for example, I have Elasticsearch or some kind of Elk stack so that I can go put in a correlation ID to see all the logs. But then if I want to see the trace itself, I don't have it in Elasticsearch, so I have to go somewhere else. And this is great. This is basically allows me to see the transaction in terms of the components that's involved side by side with my logs, so that I have the context for both things in one go. Another thing I didn't show you is you can also see the timeline as well, which basically shows me for this invocation where the time was spent on. So if you've got multiple Lambda functions, you can also see the things that stack together so that you get a complete view in terms of when did some action happen, how long it took, and then in terms of the overall transaction duration. And another thing is that I still have to worry about what. For example, when we make a request to some other third-party service or to another AWS service, again, like being able to track the request and response is just so powerful when it comes to debugging problems. And that's probably the most important state that is that when it comes to
being able to infer the internal state of the application and figuring out what is actually happening and why are we seeing errors. That is probably the single most important thing that I don't have in most of other tools that I do work with. For example, X-Ray does some of this in terms of giving you the traces, the segments, and the time and all of that. But it doesn't tell me what was the request I sent to this service, so that when I need to figure out, okay, well, I know it errored, I know it took long, why? And then I have to do manual work to have instrumentation in my code, make sure that I log in those things, and then have to worry about handling log levels and things like that. So having everything being handled in one place and easily accessible and kind of easy steps through has been great for me anyway, in terms of dealing with all these client projects and trying to debug problems quickly. Is there anything else that?
I just want to say, if I may say, we're planning to have a webinar exactly on that, on what Jan talked about, just because he put out a great blog post. I think it went out today, Jan, I think, the blog post.
The blog post went out today on the Lumigo blog, and we are doing a webinar next Wednesday. I want to say, is it next Wednesday or next Thursday? Next Thursday. So I did a blog post, basically compares different approaches you can take to debug performance issues within your Lambda function. And we're going to do a webinar on this with some live demos and stuff next Thursday. So the sign up link is at the bottom of this blog post. So if you just go to lumigo.io and then go to resources and blog, is the most recent one. Actually, maybe you can put it in the chat so that you can sign up now.
Absolutely, yeah. I had it working with links earlier. I don't know what happened. Let me edit that command again. Sorry, everybody.
Great. Yeah, so AM, you got those links, right? And there are a few questions in the chat. I'm going to start at the top from PV Loft. Is it possible to customize error reporting so that you can identify critical and non-critical errors, for example?
That's actually a great question. Today, you can see the different type of errors, but if you want, like, on your own to decide what's critical and not critical, you can't do it. So I have to say that's a great idea for a new feature for Lumigo, to be able to do that. Always happy to get new features. I will say that you can add errors of your own type. So it doesn't have to be something that your Lambda is throwing out as an exception or as a timeout. You can, inside your code, you can just, if you want to add a special error without the Lambda having to crash for that, you can add like a line and you'll be able to see that. You're also, you can add special tags to your Lambda while it's running, so you can make the correlation later. But I'm going to take that as a feature request.
That's awesome. Great. Yeah. So 2 other questions in the chat. In addition to alerts, do you integrate with PagerDuty? That's the one question. And the next one is Lumigo IO going to do something that will increase AWS bills? Okay.
Yeah, so, okay, great. I think Jan is showing the answer for the first question. Of course, I think alerts are no good if you can't know about them. And everyone has his own way that he likes to get his alerts. So yes, you can see we integrate with a lot. And this is actually something that we're continuously adding, upon user requests, but we already have quite a few. You can also, if you're using Jira, this came from our customers. You can open a ticket directly in Jira. You can also even assign an issue from the Lumigo platform to any user you want. So we know this is a very important part. And the second question about the AWS bill. So there, basically, it might be, but it will be very, very low. I'll explain why. Because we're collecting metrics from your system. So if you have like a very high number of Lambdas with a lot of invocations, as we collect them, it can take time. But again, it will be like only a few dollars a month.
Cool. I'm looking for that link. You said it was at the bottom of the first. Okay, great. Cool. Find it in your blog post.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we had on the Lumigo platform, right?
For now.
Okay, cool. So in that case, I want to switch gear a little bit and just talk about some of the open source stuff we've got. Actually got quite a few things I want to talk about. Probably the first one, and this is something that I'm really proud of, I've been working on it for a while now, is the Lumigo CLI. It's basically a suite of, I guess, commands that address a lot of these, I guess, day-to-day annoyances or things that you got to deal with. For example, something really basic, I guess, to start with, to get us started with is, well, I work with a lot of different AWS accounts. Some are with Lumigo, some with my personal, some are with different clients. So being able to switch between different accounts quickly is also something that I find very useful. So with the Lumigo CLI, which you can install by npm, I can say Lumigo CLI, who am I currently logged in as? That's my personal account. If I want to switch to another account, I can say switch profile, and I can select from a number of different accounts. For example, if I want to use the Lumigo the dev account, and then this basically would allow me to use AWS commands to I hope that's nothing that we shouldn't show on. Okay, great. So
never know.
So
rolling the dice.
So right. So that allows me to easily switch between different accounts quickly. And the Lumigo CLI also has got a bunch of other helper commands. Let me switch back to my. Oh yeah. So once I switch the account, I can see who am I logged in as. Great. Now I want to switch back to my personal account to run a few other demos. So I'm going to do that. One thing, for example, if you've got lots of different functions in your account, different regions and things like that, that you can just run a single list lambda command, which basically just reports back all the functions that I have in the different accounts, but also importantly, zoom out a little bit. It tells me, for example, it highlights functions that are running on old versions of runtime that are no longer supported. Also, it tells me when it was last active, and this covers all the different regions. And also, let's see, okay, only have a node here, but basically it tells me functions that are running on old runtimes that need to be looked at. Another thing I want to talk about is, for example, Lambda cold starts is quite a common issue. So to help you sort of get a better quantitative understanding of what your cold start actually looks like in terms of duration, there's a command to analyze Lambda cold starts, which in this case I have to provide the, say, a region so that to narrow down the search a little bit. In this case, what's going to do is it's going to look for a function that's been running for the last well, I've got a lot of phantom account function that doesn't have log groups. So this behind the scenes runs some queries against the logs for your functions and runs very exceeded. Okay, great. This is not turning out that well. Let's see, what can I do? Let's try one particular function that I think I ran recently. Let me see, got a function that I ran recently, 3 hours ago. This one would do. I can also just analyze a single function as well. All right, let's recover this. Let's try this. So you can do just an individual function or analyze all the functions in a particular region. Okay, there you go. Okay, nothing in the last hour. I can look for, hold on, let's see what are the different options I have. So I can scan data for the last, let's say last 6 hours. So this analyzes the data, invocation data that you have in the for the last couple of hours, and then tell you what's the duration for the initialization, and also if you got any provision concurrency provisioned for the function, what's your utilization level. You can also get the same information from the Lumigo console as well. You don't have to use the Lumigo CLI for that. And another really useful one is be able to tune your Lambda functions for basically right sizing the memory. So if I go to my functions, let me see, Lambda, got a couple of examples of functions that are either CPU intensive. Okay, they've got CPU bound function that basically just well, do some busy CPU work. And so how much memory I should allocate to this function. So right now it's on 128 meg. So if I want to find, is that the right memory size I should use for this function? And then what we have is a Lumigo CLI command to power tune lambda function. I have to give it the region, US East 1, and the name of the function was CPU bound example. And I have to say what strategy I want to use. So, and again, let me just look at the command line options you have, which allows me to configure a whole bunch of different things, including just say, well, once you work out the optimal memory allocation, just update the function itself. So in this case, I want to run the function. I want to say, please use the strategy to find me the best balance between memory or cost and the speed. But also I want to say, use a particular payload. In this case, it takes n. So make it a bigger number. Not too big, not big enough. So behind the scenes, what this is going to do is it's going to deploy an application from SAR, or the service application repository, and it's going to deploy it to my environment and check that it's the latest version, and then it's going to start that execution. So we go to step functions now. So this is the power tune lambda function state machine, which Alex Casaboni from AWS is responsible for. So if you look at what it's doing, basically it's taking this input for the function that we want to tune, the payload, and then what it's going to do is it's going to execute different memory settings. So if you look at the memory settings for this guy, there you go. For different memory settings, you're going to try to execute it and then figure out what's the executor. Okay, there you go. Okay, there you go. So for different memory settings, it's going to work out what's the duration and the total cost. So if I go back here, okay, now it's done. It tells me that the best balance, the best bang for your buck is using 128 meg. So it turns out I was using the right memory setting for in the first place. And then when I say visualization, I have a visualization like this, where, as you can see, with this particular example, giving more memory, it doesn't really have too much impact on the performance, presumably because the 1.2 millisecond, because my payload is too small, so it's finished it too quickly. So maybe I have to give it a bigger number. So what's this? This is 1 million. So hopefully, let's see if what happens with this. Once I've got a bigger payload, maybe we can see some value coming back from having a function that uses more memory. But as you can see from that graph, because we give it more memory, it increased our cost, but didn't improve the performance, which is why it recommended us to stick with 128 meg. So let's see what else. Right, okay, now it's done again. Okay, so now it recommends the 256. So based on my function, you can see in this case, increasing the memory size increased the cost, but also going from 128 to 256 had a massive impact on the performance. But after that, it kind of just plateaued, because I guess 1 million calculations, what he was doing, I think he was doing Fibonacci. So 1 million sequence, having more memory doesn't give you much. Equally, if you've got functions that are just doing I/O, then of course more memory is also not going to give you much as well. But in this case, because we can use this to tune our function and work out what's the best memory setting based on the payload, based on what our function is doing. So this is great, especially if you include it as part of your CI/CD pipeline. You can automate this into your CI/CD pipeline, so that you always make sure that you're running on the optimal size for your function.
Cool. Do you want to take a quick break real quick just to come back and explain what we're doing. We've had a couple people ask, what is this? So people are joining in. Claudine, do you want to give us a recap real quick? What do you think?
Yeah.
Who
Well,
are
we are Howdy Partner, and the purpose of this show is to highlight AWS partner network partners that do really cool tools to help our customers use AWS. And we are with our partner, Lumigo.
Lumigo.
On this episode to talk about serverless monitoring. And Jan was just showing us the Lumigo CLI.
All right. Thank you for that, Claudine. Back to it.
By the way, I think it's a good time to say that the Lumigo CLI is very strong with when you're developing, which is usually what we do most of the time. I think that in general, when we started building the Lumigo platform, for us it was very clear that it's aimed for production. Like that's what we thought, that this is where people will want to see all the errors and what's going on and so on. But you learn along the way, and not always your assumptions are correct, because, well, of course it's for production, but we saw that first our own developers, but also a lot of our users are using it during development, just because it's easier to see the different issues and exactly what happened, and also to follow your integration tests and understand what's going on. So it became something that follows you along your development cycle into production, and not only in production. And I think that's one of the reasons that there's a lot of tools around that in helping you through the development process.
Are there video walkthroughs of how to use a CLI? 41 Wolves, I think, has asked this question twice. So any video walkthroughs that you offer?
I've got a couple of videos on my YouTube channel. I recorded them a while back. Let me see if I can find it for you. And then I can, not every single command, but I did record a few of them. Let me find it for you, and then I will share that with you on the channel in the chats.
Anything just Lumigo related, not necessarily CLI specific video resources that people can access?
So funny you asked that. We're just talking about this this week about we need to do a couple of tutorial videos like this so that we can walk people through the platform and different things you can do with the platform.
You've got a +1, I think, from 41 Wolves for that feature.
Yeah, we're just talking about it and saying how we don't have one. We should have one.
Yeah. I totally feel like 41 Wolves. Yeah, anything I can see is usually much easier for me than what I have to read.
Okay, so let's see. Yeah, there's a couple other things as well. So, for example, when you're working with EventBridge and SNS, one of the DynamoDB streams, and one of the things that during deployment, one of the pain points is that it's really hard to see what's going into those streams. For example, EventBridge, I don't really know if I'm publishing the right events, and quite a few times now I've had to create a Lambda function just to print what's being published into the stream, or into the event bus. So another thing that the Lumigo CLI does is it's got a bunch of commands, including quite a few of them to tell different event sources like EventBridge bus or EventBridge rule, or Kinesis, or SNS, or SQS, or DynamoDB streams, or coverage logs as well. So, for example, I've got a little demo app I set up a while back where this is like an e-commerce restaurant or food ordering thing where when I click a tile, it places an order. Oh, oops, my token is expired. Sign in again. when I place an order, this gets published the event to EventBridge, and then the Lambda function picks it up and publish another event. So if you want to see what's actually going on in this particular event bus, so I've got event bus here. It's called orders Kepler events. So I can do Lumigo CLI, tell EventBridge bus region US is 1, and then the name. So this allows me to then just tap into the bus and see all the events flowing into it. So now if I place another order, you can see those events being, I can see what events are going into it, which is really helpful, especially doing development, because I want to check, okay, am I sending the right payload through EventBridge? And also you can see that we're tracking collision IDs. Again, something that I've had to do quite a lot just so that I get those logs that I can easily search across all of them. And another thing that the Lumigo really helps with in terms of not having to do a lot of this stuff by hand. Similarly, if I go, if I want to do just the EventBridge rule, I can also do the same thing as well. But I want to show you also the SNS side of things as well. You know what? Okay, this Lumigo CLI can also tell SNS, which I've got a topic which gets published. Where is it? SNS. Okay, there you go. So I think this is the topic I want to tell. So again, when I do this, I can then listen to this is in this restaurant example. When I place an order, the restaurant is going to get a SNS notification. So when I do this, I want to see an event coming through, which again make it really easy to sort of see what's going on in SNS and the EventBridge doing development. So what else I want to show you? There's also a couple other things around the tailing down DB tables for streams as well. So let me see if I've got an example here.
We're getting a shout out in the chat about the replay SQS DLQ command yeah.
So that's another common problem I have to do. It's great, I've got DLQ messages, but what I do with it, I need to replay it to say something else. So in this case, I've got messages in the DLQ, YC test DLQ. So there's a command to say Lumigo CLI, replay SQS DLQ, and then I don't remember the arguments. Okay, there you go. So again, I'll say the region and the name of the DLQ, which is the YC test DLQ. And I can say I want to replay that to the main queue, which in this case, I have to give it a name for the target, which in this case, I'm going to put it back into YC test. I can also have the option to just keep so sometimes you just want to replay them into another queue so that you can try to process it again, but you don't want to delete them just yet. For example, maybe I don't want to put it into the production main queue just yet. I want to make sure that what I'm doing is actually going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replay those events to another queue in a different account. So this is where I can specify target profile and the target so that I can basically move, but keep the messages in the DLQ in production, but then replay those events messages in the staging account, make sure everything is working before I then run a command again to replay them into the main production queue. And sometimes maybe I don't want to replay them into SQS. I can replay them into SNS or Kinesis instead. So I can do the same thing, but the default is SQS. So in this case, if I say I'm not going to keep them, I'm just going to replay them to the main YC test queue. Then again, it's just going to run the polars behind the scenes. And then now if I refresh, you see all the messages having gone back into the main queue. So that's the SQS replay, SQS queue. There's also some stuff for tailing down DB streams and the Kinesis streams as well. Let me see if I got a table I can do that with. Let's see, you've got streams enabled. Nope, no streams enabled. No. Okay, here's one. So I can say Lumigo CLI tail DynamoDB, DynamoDB. So again, region, and then the name of the table. So now I can then tap into what's happening in this table. So if I say delete, then that should come through eventually. Not yet. Okay, let me create an item. The 29 shot. Okay. So maybe this is still catching up on the stream. So this might take a little while because it's, I think, subscribed to get all this, well, starting from the beginning. So it might take a while to get all the times through. So let me keep this running for a little while. And then there's also kinesis as well. So if I want to say tail kinesis, US is 1. Saying that I might also have a similar problem with this, that is going to start from the beginning of the stream and then try to get all the way to the end. So here's my kinesis stream. And funny thing, with kinesis, there's also no way to send data into it. But what we can do is we can cheat and say use the Lumigo CLI's replay SQS, DLQ, and then YC test, and then we're going to basically replay the messages we had in the SQS queue into the target's kinesis. Hold on, let me just double check my arguments. Okay, the DLQ is YC test where I have 60 messages waiting. So I've got 120, I've got YC test, and then I'm going to replay those into the target, which is kinesis, and then I'm going to replay the name, which is target name, okay. And that's where's my kinesis stream gone? Okay, there you go. That's my kinesis stream. Region. US East 1, okay. So this is gonna basically take all of those messages I had in SQS and put them into kinesis instead. Not something that I sort of do usually, but it's something that definitely a few people have asked for. So we can tap into what the events are coming into kinesis. In this case, you can see the payload coming through. We also binary decode, binary decode, or basically decode the message for you as well. So with kinesis, the records are in binary, so we actually change them for you. Okay, stop this. Let me see if I got my. Okay, there you go. Finally, so my DynamoDB stream have caught up, and which was lost or not found. Okay. So something changed with the shard, but we did get those two remove message and the insert message printed out before somehow we lost the shard. So yeah, so this is how you can tell kinesis and DynamoDB streams. Another thing we've been working on, I've been working on the last couple of weeks, it's still very much early stages, is we want to basically give you a list of recommendations on the things you can do to improve your AWS resources. For example, maybe you've got SQS using SQS with Lambda, or you're using a Lambda function that's got with async event source, but you haven't configured your DLQ. So we give you some recommendations for that. So let me see, and the output of that recommendation is going to look something like this, whereby essentially we will ask you to give us some permission to scan your resources, and then we give you a report okay. So for example, if you got DB tables, we can check whether or not your tables should have is missing tags, so that you can use you can add tags so that you can do cost tracking better, including adding tags for center, for stage, and things like that. But also maybe your table, based on usage, you could have saved some money if you switch to on-demand. So this is if you got a provision table that based on usage would be cheaper if you just run them on demand, or vice versa. If you've got tables that are on demand but should be the usage quite stable, then you can also we may also recommend you to switch to provisioned. For Lambda functions, we got a whole bunch of different kind of recommendations for, again, tagging. For Node.js functions, if you don't have this environment variable, then that means I actually wrote a blog post on this. So one of the most efficient, I guess, effective and best performance optimization for Node.js functions is just to add this environment variable, because the AWS SDK doesn't enable HTTP keep alive by default, which means even though the request to DB may be only 6 or 7 milliseconds, you might see 30 milliseconds because there's the HTTP handshake that happens on every single request. But if you enable this, then once those HTTP connections being established, then they get reused. So we give you recommendations like this that you can easily follow. There's other recommendations. Hopefully, I've got my functions. Okay, things like this as well. That you've got function that's got a large package size. Maybe you should think about with Node.js function size. Think about using Webpack to help you reduce the package size, but also help you improve the code style performance as well. Let's see if there's anything else that's interesting. Here you go. Here's the function that is listening to Kinesis streams, but it doesn't have an on-failure destination. So that essentially, since the last reInvent, AWS allow you to have a DLQ for Kinesis or DynamoDB stream functions as well. So again, we look at your functions configurations and see you got Kinesis stream functions that really should have on failure, so that you don't get stuck with a poison message. Similarly, that would be applied to DynamoDB stream functions as well. Let me see if anything else. Right. Also, functions that are running on deprecated runtimes. We tell you about that. There's quite a few other different recommendations that we give you. Let me see if there's anything interesting for SQ. Okay, there you go. Here's one. Functions with ACN event sources like SNS, Event Bridge, and so on. They really should be configured with DLQ or Lambda destination, so that if there's persistent errors, then you will be able to capture them so that you don't lose those events. And for SQS functions, again, this is a best recommendation. That is the best practice that is recommended by AWS, whereby the visibility timeout for the queue should be at least 6 times the Lambda function timeout. Things like this, we got quite a long list of different things that we recommend you. And also, not just the Lambda function themselves. If you've got SQS queues, okay, I've got one here that's so SNS topics. That's got, okay, missing DLQ for SQS, SQS functions, missing DLQs, missing tags, and things like that. So this is still very much work in progress. As you can see, the formatting is not particularly pretty, but certainly something that we are really excited about to be able to give you more active advice on the things you can do straight away to improve your AWS resources, how you're using them and how you're configuring them, including IAM roles and not having stars and things like that. Let's see, is there anything else? Okay, right. Now let's move on to SaaS, unless you got anyone's got other questions.
I have a question. I saw a bunch of Node.js support. Are there any Python or any of the other language? Will it scan the SDKs for that type of thing or optimizations?
Not at the moment. So luckily that HTTP keep alive optimization is only necessary for Node.js functions because all the other runtimes have HTTP keep alive enabled by default. It's only the Node.js runtime that doesn't have it.
Nice.
But if there are other sort of best practices that people should follow with Python or Java or other runtimes functions, that please let me know. I'll be very happy to include those as well. Okay, so let's see. So there's a question about, is the Lumigo CLI connected somehow to your platform? No, it's not. It's an open source tool, so it's free for you to use. You don't have to sign up to the Lumigo platform itself. Let's see what else. So I want to talk about some of the SARs we've got as well. A very common thing that people ask about is, well, with Lambda, you've got this. Let me just close some of this. So let's clutter. If you go to the Lambda console, interesting trivia. So you've got this code storage, which basically is a soft limit that says when you upload your function, all the artifacts is stop taking up spaces, and you have a 75 gig soft limit. I don't know how this happened, but I managed to break mine. It's been on -241 for like over a year. So I guess that means effectively I've got infinite storage for Lambda.
Wow.
I don't know how it happened, but for everyone else, you have to worry about hitting this 75 gig limit. So one of the things that you can do is every time you deploy a new version of your function with SAM or with the server framework, chances are you don't need all these hundreds different versions going back God knows how long. So one of the things you can do is deploy this Lambda janitor, which essentially runs a cron job, which allows you to say, or you can deploy that with the server framework or SAM or CloudFormation as well, or we can do that in the console, which essentially deploys some resources to your AWS environment, and you can configure how many versions to keep for each function, and then also, as part of the safeguard, we don't delete anything that's still referenced by an alias, but we also keep the most recent X number of versions anyway. So you can just do this. If you never used a SAR before, it's really just something that you can think of it as a parameterized CloudFormation stack that you can deploy into your account really easily. And it's a semantic version in this case as well. So if you look at the resources that this guy is going to provision, basically it's going to provision some IAM roles for the Lambda function, but also IAM role for the Lambda function. Okay, still provisioning. IAM role for Lambda function. Okay, there you go. And the Lambda functions basically go through your Lambda functions and then delete versions that are no longer referenced by an alias, or is not or is older than the most recent 3 versions that you've configured, and it also configures a cron event in the event bridge, so that they run, I think, once every hour. That's it. Every hour is going to do this. So this is a very useful thing to deploy to every every region, and then you can so that way you don't have to constantly worry about hitting that 75 gig limit, because you've got too many functions in your account that using a lot of space. So this is a very useful thing I deployed. I see a lot of people use. Other things include, so for example, with Lambda functions, every single function is going to have is going to create its own log group. So if you're doing some kind of something to sort of ship all of your logs to a single place, maybe to Elasticsearch or to some other provider, Logs.io, Datadog, or whatever, then you're going to need to get your logs out by subscribing it to a log subscription. Again, this is something that every time you create a new function, you can have to remember to do, or you have to find some other way to do this. So Server Framework's got a plugin for it. But again, this is something I consider that you should be doing once per region, and that's it, which is why we've got a SAR, which allows you to do that. So again, you can deploy this from the console or with Server Framework or with CloudFormation or with SAM. And then in this case, I can configure what's the destination for my logs to go to, which could be Lambda, could be Kinesis streams, could be Firehose streams. And then you can also target specific log groups based on prefix and things like that as well. So I've done this already, so I'm going to ignore. I'm not going to do this again. But in this case, you can see in my log groups, all my logs are subscribed, all my Lambda function logs are subscribed and shipped to something. And that's because I've got this thing deployed so that it does that. Equally, if you're shipping your logs to something else already, it doesn't make sense for you to keep them in CloudWatch logs and still pay, I think it's 3 cents per gigabyte per month. The default configuration for CloudWatch logs is to never expire. I guess AWS doesn't want to delete your logs without you saying so. So again, we have another SAR that you can deploy into your environment, which you can just say change the default retention. So when you deploy this SAR, what it's going to do is it's going to run through all of your logs. It's going to change the configuration. The same with the other one as well. That is going to change the configuration to list function that matches the filter. Change the subscription to send them to whatever destination you set. And then every time you create a new function, a new log group, it doesn't have you don't have to do it by hand. Whenever they're created, we use the CloudTrail to capture those events when log groups are created, and then we subscribe it for you, or we're going to set the retention for you. So these are some of the most common things we see people do. Other than that, there's also I think we mentioned earlier with Lambda layers. So the thing with Lambda layers is that when you publish a new version of a layer, you still have to update all the functions that depends on that layer, right? So what we have here is another SAR that essentially says, okay, for any functions, you can configure, say, any functions that's got this tag, or every function apart from function that's got this tag, update the Lambda layer whenever we update this layer URL, ARN. So essentially, you have one place where you've deployed a new version of your layer, and then you update the ARN here. Then you deploy this SAR again, and then that is going to go ahead and then update all the functions that, depending on that SAR, that are targeted by your or only do the ones for the function that's got this tag.
You don't have to update your function code typically, though. That was what we were talking about earlier today. Like, you don't actually have to update the function code, just the layer itself on the function.
Yes, but then that's still deployment, right? So something has to deploy a function or update configuration. Because this is that thing. This is the thing that's going to update the configuration for your function for you.
Right. I think that's the point, though, about the Lambda layer is why it's useful, is that I don't have to go in and alter the code, right? Because code changes are a lot different than just configuration changes. I feel like, personally.
Well, you say that, but it's still, I think there's not that much difference. So if there's a new version of NPM package I need, what do I need to do? I need to go change the code, change my NPM install again, and then do a deployment. So even if it's a SAR, some things have to change. Instead of doing a change to the NPM JSON or whatever package JSON or whatever, I have to change my configuration in my SAM or in my service YAML or my CloudFormation to point my function to the latest version of SAR that I want to use for each function. So somewhere I still have to make some code change. It doesn't have to be, it's just a question of whether it's going to be my package manager or with my CloudFormation. So something you still have to do something to update the reference for a function when a new version of a SAR is available. So I think this whole argument of no code change is on thin ground.
Okay, fair enough. Agree to disagree.
And also there's other things which something else that is quite powerful, but also I haven't found a nice way to do that just yet. So one of the things we talked about is alerts and for CloudWatch and things like that. So for example, when you have a Lambda function, you kind of want to have some amount of pretty much every function should have some alarms set up for them in terms of error rates, in terms of or for APIs, in terms of latency. So I've got this macro that you can deploy as a SAR. So you can deploy this as a SAR, and then this is going to give you a macro, in which case you can then say, I'm going to configure a default for my entire region so that every time, when a project opts in to have this macro, then I can use this configuration to say, okay, for any Lambda function, always create an alert for error rate, not count, error rate, throttle count, DLQ error count, so on. Every time there's a new SQSQ that's been provisioned in the stack, always add the new alert for this message age metric, or the actual name is approximate age of the oldest message. Basically, this tells you when your processor for SQS is falling behind. And to set a default threshold to 10 minutes for API gateway, create this default alarms for every single endpoint or for step functions. So I've got one default configuration for project, and then for a new project to opt in, essentially I'm going to do something like this, where I've got a configuration for the default, and then for my project, I have to configure first a macro to bring in the a transform to bring in the macro that's been deployed, and then specify some parameters in the CloudFormation stack so that I can configure an override value, but also configure an SNS topic so that that gets configured with my alerts. And then because I'm bringing this macro, it's going to then check the resources I have in my stack. In this case, I've got some Lambda function, I've got some API gateway endpoints, I've got step functions, the state machine, and I've got SQSQ. So based on a default configuration, it should create a bunch of alerts for me. And so if I look at the stack, the CloudFormation stack I've got here, that's the main stack, and the macro created a bunch of nested stacks to say create SQS alert for me automatically based on the fact that I've got SQSQ. It created the Lambda function alert for me for the throttle count and for the error rate, and the value for the thresholds is use my default configuration here. 1% for the error rate, so 1% for the error rate, and also created something for the state machines. But in this case, it didn't create anything for API gateway, and that's because in my override config, I said, do not, hold on. I said, do not disable alert, disable the creation of the iterator age alert for this Lambda function and for APIs for this path. Don't create the P90 and 95 and 99 and the state and the error code alarms for me. If I just change this to say, oh, actually, right, I don't want to override. I want to just create a default for maybe not P9. Okay, just disable P90 because I don't really care about P90, and I don't care about the. Actually, let me show you. Just disable the P90 for now. And I save this configuration, this override configuration for this project, and then I can deploy again. And so behind the scenes, this is going to kick off or not. Ah, okay, hold on. I'm in the wrong directory, examples. So this is gonna do its thing. It's gonna package my project using serverless framework. And then waiting for okay, there you go. So it's gonna create a whole bunch of resources, including Lambda functions, API gateway, and so on, IAM roles, and so on, and all that. Oh, sorry, I skipped it. Let me force it. Because I've actually changed the stack itself. And then when this goes through CloudFormation, the macro is going to kick in, and it's going to then generate those alarms for me as nested stacks. So this is So this is a really powerful thing, something that a lot of people struggle with in terms of just knowing what alerts they should set up in the CloudWatch. Even though I think actually someone asked said that earlier, right? That when we talk about the cons of Lambda, one of the things that someone said was CloudWatch and CloudWatch alerts confuses me. So this is something that can unconfuse. Well, unconfused, is that a word? That can help you do the right thing, at least set up some sane defaults in terms of alerts you should have in your system. But it's just not as easy to use because of the fact that it's a macro and you have to provide the override configs and things like that. But in the ideal situation where you've got some organization-wide convention you want to apply, you encode that into your configuration, put it into your SSM parameter store parameter, then anyone that's deploying their stack and is bringing in this macro and configuring what SNS topic they should use for the alerts, then they should get a lot of all the alarms by default. So now that it's deployed, if I refresh this, there's an necessary stack that is now created P95 and 99 percentile alert. So that my API endpoint, if it goes over 3 seconds over the last 5 minutes, it's going to alert me. For P99 is 5 seconds, and the 2xx dropping below 99%, or 4xx errors going up over 5% or 1%. So these are just same defaults that I find useful myself, and I've used it for most of my projects. So again, just make it easy so you don't have to remember to do this yourself. Of course, you can also use Lumigo, which I think we're going to do some of those sensible alerts for you as well. So I think that's kind of it on my list of open source stuff I want to share.
I mean, just a few things, right?
Just a few things.
That's a lot. That's amazing. There's so many things to utilize. That was amazing, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been busy.
Apparently. What do you think, Claudine?
Yeah, that was incredible. Lots of things. And I think the viewers learned a lot today. I mean, I learned a lot.
Me too. So let's move towards wrapping up, I guess. Aviad and Jan, are there any parting words of wisdom or things that you want somebody? What would you want somebody watching today to walk away with the most of all?
I think that serverless is amazing, and in order for you to fully enjoy it, just use all these tools, or not all of them. You can pick the ones that you need to make your life easier, so you can just ride into the serverless and do the cool stuff.
Yeah, and use Lumigo.
You're such a salesman.
I'm an advocate.
In the chat, I just dropped how you sign up to go try this stuff out. And there's a lot to try out. And I think everything I saw today is amazingly useful, especially for those people who are running serverless projects at scale and in larger areas. This is really some of those tools that will help make your life easier when things start to go sideways, which they most definitely will, no matter what. No matter what planning you do, everything will break. So
yeah, I just wrote in a promo code which you can use, which is especially
nice.
Howdy partners viewers. So once you sign up, just add that in the settings. Get a special offering.
I love it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Jan, Aviad, thank you so much for joining us. Claudine, what should people do to watch Howdy Partner next?
You should follow us.
Yeah. Follow the channel.
That's like a reasonable thing to do, right? This is the last episode of season 1 too, right, AM? Is this our last episode together? Am I supposed to be sad now? I really like hosting with you. So
I have to say, you don't look sad.
I don't.
I have to
I
say.
am really sad on the inside.
Okay.
But I think this is the last episode of season 1, and so we're about to start season 2.
Yes. Yeah, I think we have a bit of a break, and when I say a bit, it's just like a week and a day or so. Our next episode is July 15th. That's on the calendar. We might have an episode on July 13th, but that's pretty soon, and we don't have anybody in that slot right now, so you never know. But we definitely have something special for you on July 15th. I actually believe that she might be in the audience right now. We have a special guest joining us on July 15th. So we're having our first SI partner join us, number 1, which is super cool. And we're having a special guest host from another AWS Twitch show. I already gave you a few hints. She's the host of an AWS Twitch show. She's very interested in AWS certifications. So that might give you, if you watch. Oh, it's not Nikki. No. Nikki is one of my old co-hosts from Build with AM and Nikki, another show that we did. That might have another season, by the way. That might come back at some point. She's on the Amplify team now, and we've got some interesting opportunities, I think, with Amplify and some of our partners. So our worlds may intersect again. I don't know. Anyway, so this wonderful host from a very certification-centric AWS show, if you haven't watched it, should be joining us on the 15th at 2 p.m. Pacific, just like you watched today. And then for the rest of July, we'll be doing every Monday, every Wednesday from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific, just like we did today. And Claudine, I don't want to say this is our last episode together. We'll have to book something. Maybe August.
Yeah,
maybe
we should.
September.
Yeah, we definitely should.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you'll host with me again.
I would. I totally would. Yeah. But today's episode was super fun. That was incredible, you guys. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for staying up late. I know that it's not normal working hours where you are. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Sure. Oh, one thing I have to say, I just forgot. Yes. The playground where we saw the demo, it's running on an AWS account which has based on an open source. Like what we monitored is an open source written by Heitor Lessa from AWS. So just a shout out to him and a big thank you for him.
I've got to say one thing too before we go. Where's Bacon, Claudine?
He is doing what he does best.
Sleeping?
Yeah, you can't see, but he is over there.
Is he snoring?
He is not right now. But he's definitely just, being a rock star.
That's what Bacon does. Okay, well, come join us again on the 15th to learn more about AWS partners and how they can help you utilize AWS in new and interesting ways. Claudine, it's always a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Aviad and Jan, thank you so much for joining us.
We'll
see you.
Thank you so much.
Next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.